welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Professor Baker, for this introduction. Thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me as one of the keynote speakers. Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here and thank you for being part in this important conference. My name is Xueli Abbing, UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for the fight against racism and discrimination, and I'm the chairperson and founder of the Open Eyes Foundation. I feel very honored to be invited at this important conference to speak and listen and talk with you all about this very important issue that is very close to my heart, the mental health of young persons with a disability, and more specifically, with albinism. When I was young, people said that I looked like an angel because I was pale and I was different. I was also asked to pretend to be an angel in a video clip of an artist. At that time, I did not fully realize that playing an angel was also a stereotype, a way of putting me in a box. For a long time, I did not question it, but eventually I asked myself, am I breaking stereotypes or am I becoming one? For many young people with albinism and other disabilities, those labels shape not only just how they see themselves, but also how they are seen by others. And that affects our mental health in ways that are not always visible. Feeling left out at school or being rejected for a job because someone assumes you are not capable, or having to explain yourself again and again that you are more than your diagnosis. Those are not isolated experiences. They affect bigger problems, which is that mental health support for persons with disabilities is too often medicalized or dismissed. Across Europe, over 100 million people live with a disability. They are nearly twice as likely to experience depression or anxiety compared to their peers, yet face the highest barriers to healthcare. In total, approximately 40 to 50,000 persons with albinism live in Europe. So today, I want to share some findings of our research, which was conducted by Henny Kim, who is also with us in the audience. Thank you. So, who works also at this foundation, at my foundation, as project officer. And we also share some stories of young people with albinism I've interviewed for my podcast series. Those voices remind us that behind every statistics is a young person with albinism and a call for change. To explore this issue with you, I will move through 4 themes that build on one another. First, I want to talk about identity and stereotypes, because the way society labels young people with disabilities is often part of a bigger problem. Second, I will share about mental health challenges and systematic barriers, the real consequences of those stereotypes and exclusions. Third, I want to bring in examples of practical accessibility gaps, because those challenges may seem small to persons without a disability, but they create daily obstacles that must be addressed. And finally, I will speak on advocacy and systematic change, looking at how we can move from individual resilience to collective responsibility. 1. Identity and stereotypes. Stereotypes and labels are often invisible barriers. They do not just affect how others see us, they shape how we see ourselves. Social theory reminds us that people are not disabled because of their condition alone, but because of physical, social, and cultural barriers that limit participation. In other words, it's not the eyes that cannot see. In other words, it's not the eyes that cannot see clearly that create the disability, but a world that refuses to see opportunities and adjust to their needs. Those barriers often begin with identity. Many young people with albinism grow up being labeled fragile, angelic, incapable, or associated with superstitions before they are given the opportunity to define themselves. For some people, those labels increase isolation. For others, questioning them becomes a drive and a first step towards independence. My own journey reflects this. People assume things about me, and when they started to ask questions, they started to ask questions to the persons accompanying me. And I was ignored because people thought I was incapable and I needed help for everything. Over time, I began to learn what I can do against this. I learned to ask, explain my situation, and not to judge them, but to tell my story. We must acknowledge that when people stereotype others, this is part of a bigger problem that concerns us all, not only people with a disability. We should all use our voices to find our own paths. And we should also see that you are not your disability. Disabilities are part of who you are. It's part of your identity, but it's not the who you are. The challenges come from intersection of disability with gender, ethnicity, appearance, and culture. I will give an example from a YouTube channel. We had a guest in our podcast series, Albinism Talks, Latifa. She is 21 years old from the Netherlands with African roots. She shared how she was bullied, overprotected, and being labeled albino. At school, she always finished last in exams because of her slower reading speed, which left her feeling excluded. She, like me, rejects the word albino, saying, "I'm a person with albinism. Albinism is part of me, not my whole identity." I relate to her story, as it shows that stereotypes are not only words, but they shape how people see themselves and how others see them. And over time, those stereotypes can weigh heavily on one's mental health. Her words remind us all that identity is not just part of. Her words remind us that identity is not just about how we define others, but it's also a space society can give to define who we are. So the real question is, are we creating environments where young people with disabilities can define themselves freely, or are we labeled? Part 2, mental health challenges and systematic barriers. When young people are underestimated, excluded, or constantly told they are different, it seeps into mental health. This is why research shows that people with a disability are more likely to report unmet healthcare needs and depression and anxiety compared to their peers. But behind every statistics, behind every research, there is a person, a young person like Luna, 18 years old. She is also from the Netherlands. She shared during the same podcast series how she was rejected by several companies when applying for internship, where she thought the interview went well, but then they decided to not hire her because they thought she would be incapable of doing the job. She described that day how she cried at school for feeling devastated, but when someone finally gives her a chance, she proved that she could do it. Her story shows that the problem was not her, but it was the barriers. Luna's experience also shows us that mental health challenges are not simply related to disability as such. They come often with the environment, the employers who say no, the schools that cannot facilitate us, the systems that treat inclusion as optional or see it as something special. They need to demonstrate to others that they are doing their best. We also heard from Nan from the UK, who lives with albinism. In the podcast, they are queer, immigrant, and a person of color. They spoke about getting stares on the street, jokes about tanning, and daily microaggressions that remind them that they are seen as different. But Nan also said that if they mock them, this is ableism. Nan's experience highlights other important point. Mental health is not shaped by only one factor. It is overlapping pressures such as disability, race, gender, identity, all at once. And when society fails to recognize this complexity, people fall through the cracks. So, when we talk about mental health and albinism, it is not enough to see it as a medical issue. It is a societal problem. We need to recognize that depression, anxiety, and distress often comes from stigma, rejection, and exclusion. Part 3. Practical accessibility and systematic change. Barriers are also designed in our systems, in the way services, policies, and everyday processes are built. When those systems are inaccessible, they don't only block participation, but they also create stress. Take something as ordinary as filling out a form, for example, for a visa application. For many of us, it is already stressful. But if you have a visual impairment, forms that are not compatible with screen readers is very hard. So, a simple confusion between the number 0 and the letter O can mean rejection. This is not just a system. No, look at travel. At airports, the facial recognition machines, which are increasingly used at border control, often fail for people with albinism who struggle to keep their eyes open under the bright light, plus the nystagmus. So we must ask assistance. what should be routine becomes a source of humiliation and frustration. But on a positive note, thanks to organizations represented here, the World Health Organization has put sun cream on their essential medicine list. This is a major step forward, and let's hope it can be implemented as we already discussed. From childhood, other systematic barriers remain. Families often receive the diagnosis of albinism with little or no explanation, no clear referrals to dermatologists or ophthalmologists, and no connection to support networks. Children and parents are left to navigate on their own, often in isolation. I can give lots of examples related to travel, schools, meeting face-to-face or online, work, etc. And all those examples show that mental health challenges follow from the fact that systems are not designed with us in mind. Systems that put up barriers at every stage, from school to travel to healthcare and to work. And when people are focused on to constantly fight those barriers, the burden is not only physical but also mental. The real question becomes, how can we shift from putting responsibility on individuals to adapt, to create systems that are accessible and inclusive from the start? Part 4, Advocacy, Resilience and Guidelines. Let us be clear, telling those stories of individuals is important, but it is not enough. If we want to create real change, we must translate lived experiences into action. This means changing policies, rethinking systems, and holding institutions accountable. And this because young people with albinism cannot be expected to carry this burden alone. Following from the interviews I did for the podcast series, it becomes clear that we must invest in their independence. For instance, mobility training must automatically be given to all children with albinism all over the world. In all countries, it should be accessible, because if it's not included, it can create real dangers. For example, being hit by a car because you did not see the car coming and did not know how to use your cane correctly. It is tough to navigate as a person with a disability, which can lead to dangerous situations. The loss of independence can shape confidence for years. The same pattern appears in the workplace when we are rejected because of being visually impaired, not because the skills or capacity are the problem. It is often that the employers, have a lack of imagination and unwillingness to accommodate to our needs. This is not an individual failure, it is a systematic one. And it denies young people of chances and rights. Luna's story on this issue went viral on social media. But if companies only had to rely on chance encounters to give someone a chance, then equality remains charity and not a right. So, What does this mean for advocacy? First, accountability must be built into every system, digitally, physically, and institutional. This is not optional, it is a right, and we must check if this happens. Second, mental health services must be inclusive of persons with albinism and other disabilities. And the staff should be trained and care that physical and psychological needs are addressed. Education and workplaces must stop seeing us as the other or the outsider. We have the right to be part of a team. Every student, every employee should be given a chance to thrive. And finally, we need to move from beyond awareness raising to accountability. International frameworks like the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities give us the language of rights. But rights on paper are not enough. What matters is how they are lived. Whether a child with albinism feels safe at school, whether a young person can apply for a visa without fear, whether sun cream is available, those changes will not happen overnight. But we can start by recognizing that voices of young people with albinism are not side notes, they are essential. I spoke about identity, stereotypes, and the weight of carrying those. Barriers are not just inconveniences, but daily reminders of exclusion. But if there is one message I want to leave you with today, it is that we make choices every day, and those choices are not set in stone. We can change what people choose to believe, about us, persons with albinism and person with a disability. And we can change their way of thinking. It is like a heavy rock. You cannot push it, but you can go around it. We must make sure those choices about the workplace, about the design, about our schools, our workplaces, our healthcare systems, and our society are with us. Young people with albinism should not have to constantly explain themselves or fight twice as hard, just to be seen and to be heard. The responsibility for inclusion cannot fall only on their shoulders. It belongs to educators, policymakers, and employers, and of course, the community itself. We must talk and we must listen about mental health and about other important things like education. So, what can we do? We can share lived experiences, not just as anecdotes, but as evidence that must guide change. We can demand accountability, making sure international commitments like the CRPD are not just words on paper, but realities in daily life. We must rethink accessibility from the digital design and the digital systems. To provide healthcare so that it is inclusive for everyone, and that should be the norm, not the exception. And we must and also can celebrate diversity and our identity, not reduce people to labels or to stereotypes, but by creating spaces for people, young people with albinism, to define themselves in their own terms. We all need to see each person not as a stereotype, not as a diagnosis, but as a whole human being with rights, with dreams, with fears, and with a future worth fighting for. Thank you.